My name is Amanda Carlton, and I'm here to talk to you about Destroyer of the Gods by Larry Hurtado. This book is an in-depth look at how early Christianity had a profound impact on the Roman world, and also how that impact affects our modern views on religion today. This book is a great overview of the idea of how religion shapes culture and how God's true religion, the gospel message of salvation by grace through faith in Jesus Christ, destroyed the superstitious, man-made religions of the Roman world. And because Christianity was available not just to one ethnic group or nationality, that truth was able to spread across borders, cultures, and throughout the whole world, just as Paul observed in Romans 1:16. For I am not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, for it is the power of God to salvation for everyone who believes, for the Jew first, and also for the Greek. There are many things that made Christianity different from the polytheistic pagan religions of the and these distinctive Christian characteristics are what Hurtado focuses on. In his 5 main chapters, Hurtado examines how Christians were seen by others in early centuries. He discusses how Christianity represented a new kind of faith, one that affected how people lived their everyday lives. He talks about the cultural identity being affected by a new notion of family and community in the Christian church. And he also explores how the writings of Christianity, like the Gospels and the Epistles, played an important part in the impact of Christianity on culture. For me, however, one of his most important and interesting chapters was chapter 5, A New Way to Live. This chapter introduced some new concepts to me and forced me to think about how I view the ancient world and the people of the Bible. Chapter 5 opened my eyes to the fact that people in the first few centuries AD didn't think about the things the same way I do. I think Hurtado makes a really important point when he explains on page 144 that by understanding Roman culture without judging it, we get a better idea of why Christianity has such an impact. I learned that cultural values can really affect how we view things and what our morals and values are. I'm going to walk you through the examples that Destroyer of the Gods uses to make that point. And I'd like to start by saying that Christianity makes a huge difference in our morals and values. At least it should. Hurtado starts out with an example that really affected me emotionally. Roman culture did not put the same value on infants' lives that I do. In fact, Hurtado describes the practice of abandoning infants to die. That was pretty normal in Roman society and not widely regarded as immoral. He points out that the Romans were not cold, heartless people, but their culture put a lot more emphasis on legacies and family names than on the individual's lives. Their view of children in general was that children had very little worth and very little use other than to put up with until they became productive adults. It's hard for me as a mother to understand this attitude. To me, my children are the most precious thing in my life, but Hurtado is saying that Christianity introduced God's morals and values into culture, and I've grown up in modern Christian culture, which helps me understand how God sees every human life. The idea of abandoning a baby to die is abominable to most in our culture because Hurtado's claim is correct. However, I want to pause here and point out that our modern culture outside of Christianity seems to be reverting to a more Roman attitude. Late-term abortion and even post-birth abortions are being promoted as rights, and God's pro-life stance is being attacked. I personally feel like Chapter 5 is not only informational, but a glimpse at what our world is headed to if we don't, as Christians, make the same kind of transformative impact that early Christianity did. Hurtado argues that Christianity introduced the idea that religion should shape every aspect of our lives, that becoming a Christian should cause us to think and act differently towards one another. Another example he uses has to do with the value of human life. In Roman times, a favorite spectacle was the gladiator fights. Men would battle to the death for the amusement of the crowd. Obviously, God's morality makes this wrong, and early Christianity introduced the concept of the sacred nature of human life, which made early Christians different from the culture and the society around them. Hurtado uses these examples to contrast the idea of fitting in with the idea of being different. I'm reminded of Paul's admonition to the Romans in Romans 12:2. And do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is good and acceptable and perfect will of God. Early Christianity was countercultural. To become a Christian, one must be willing to be different, to adopt attitudes that are different than the cultures, to behave differently than society. As Hurtado puts it on page 150, Christianity was intended to shape social behavior, certainly among Christians, and also even the wider public. Again, I see this not just as an observation about the early church, but also a reminder to the modern church. Hurtado then explores the concept of sanctification. The message of the Christian gospel was, as I just read in Romans, that we can be transformed through God's grace by shaping our lives after His moral code. Most of the ancient religions didn't make behavioral demands. They were all about appeasing their gods. But Christianity asks people to give up their old ways and follow God's moral code. Even the Jews of the first few centuries who did have God's moral code in the law and the prophets needed to learn that it was not about the legalism and following the rules. It was about changing one's heart to place value on what God tells us is good and right and true. This revolutionary religion changed how people thought about sexual immorality, marriage, and abuse. Destroyer of the Gods is an eye-opening look at the history of the church and its impact on the world, but also a good reminder to us as modern Christians that we should still stand for God's truth and not for what is tolerated in our society and even approved in our culture. Thanks for listening.